Hey guys, it's Steven. If you're looking for a trade at the open that is straightforward and simple, has easy, clearly defined rules, and plays out on a very regular basis, this is a setup you should take a look at. It's the opening power bar strategy that can have you in and out of a profitable trade in under 30 minutes, sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more. But the question that keeps popping up when I tell people about this strategy is where to put the stop. So I'm going to show you a couple of different places you can put the stop to keep the strategy simple and still super effective. In this opening power bar strategy, we're looking at the pre-market, so from 4 a.m. Eastern time in the US to 9:30 Eastern time in the US, the New York Open. All you have to do, and you can again show up at 9:25 and put on this trade. You don't have to go through hours of pre-market prep to do this. Simply mark the pre-market high and the pre-market low, and then look for a power bar that originates at either the high or the low. Let me zoom in so you can see this clearly. And this was Friday. I'm making this video on Monday. This was what the opening looked like on Friday, September 5th. This was the pre-market high. This was the pre-market low. Here's where this open became a little bit complicated for this strategy. You had this opening bar, and this is the 2-minute chart. This is the cues. You had this opening bar that was basically a rickshaw man, is what this pattern's basically called. But you have this opening bar that marks indecision. Since I'm looking for a power bar, and a power bar is a bar that has a lot of body and not a lot of wick, with the full red being obviously the body, this is the first power bar. I'm looking to enter on this power bar. So basically a couple of seconds before it closes or a couple of seconds after it closes. And I'm looking, because it's a power bar originating near the pre-market high and moving lower, I'm looking to enter basically here. Now I've done a couple of videos on this trade, and the first stop, and usually the most logical stop, is at the top of the power bar. So with entry here on a short position, it makes sense to have a stop at the top of this power bar. So basically here for a stop. Often the power bar is relatively large. And one of the questions I've gotten is, I don't like setting my stop so far away because the power bar is so large. Totally valid question. And you can always adjust the size of your stop, the size of your potential loss, by scaling down. In this situation, the power bar isn't that large. So there are a couple of other places that also make sense for a stop. Because what you're trying to do when you set a stop is look for the place on the chart where the trade becomes invalid or your why disappears. I often use a simple sentence, especially for newer traders who are entering a trade setup. If your setup is, if the stock does X, then I'm going to do Z. And in this setup, that simple sentence is, if the stock has a power bar that originates near the pre-market high or low, I'm going to short at the end of that power bar. In this case, it would be a long if the power bar were coming off the bottom. I'm going to short at the end of that power bar. So a logical stop is, if that power bar gets erased, then it makes total sense to exit the trade. One of the things you can add to that setup that still keeps it simple is if the power bar gets erased, or if resistance near the top of the power bar gets erased. And in this case, that pre-market high is basically resistance. You could use either the pre-market high, or because this bar tried to peak above, you could also use just above this level. Both of these stops make perfect sense with the trade. Both of them invalidate the trade because you're moving through resistance to the upside, and that is a great place to put your stop. So when would I use this stop, the pre-market high, as a stop as opposed to the power bar? When the power bar is small enough, which is kind of funny, right? It's the opposite of a power bar, saying it's small enough. But if the power bar is small enough that it's really not that much of a stop, in that case, using that pre-market high or the pre-market low, if we're talking about a long, using that pre-market high makes total sense. Because look at what you're shooting for. Again, if this is the perfect trade, you're shooting for the pre-market low. So what we're talking about is a difference between this much as a stop and this much profit. So you're talking about basically a 3-to-1 risk-reward ratio in this trade. So why use that level, the pre-market high, as a stop instead of the top of the power bar? It just gives you a little more chance for the trade to be profitable. On Friday, if you set the stop at the top of the power bar, you were stopped out. But if you set the stop just beyond or at the pre-market high, you would have stayed in the trade and gotten right around 3 times your risk. The important thing is you don't want to set the stop at a point where it doesn't make sense, or at a point that's really too large. So you're going to lose too much on your stop if it gets taken out. And I'm working on a indicator that can be used in TradingView for this exact trade. It's not quite ready yet, but it should be in the next literally day or two. If you're watching this video, you can look at the links below, and if it's ready, there will be a link to the indicator that you can put on TradingView. But if it's not, then, and you're watching this, very soon after I make the video, this indicator is not going to be finished by my developer yet. But you can see the indicator is putting the stop above the power bar, and you would have gotten stopped out on the trade. Whereas if you had just moved it a little bit higher, where again, it totally makes sense and doesn't invalidate the trade, then it would have been a really nice trade. You would have gotten that 3x and possibly more, right? Because the market fell apart on Friday after that power bar. There was the potential to get not only 3 times your risk, but around 7 times here at the bottom. If you haven't seen me do a video on this trade before, this opening power bar strategy, you can comment power in the comments below, and I'll give you a cheat sheet that I've done on this opening power bar strategy. And again, if you're looking for a way to make it even simpler, that indicator that can be used in TradingView may or may not be ready at the time you're watching this video. But that indicator will help in identifying the power bars and where the entry should take place on this setup. And as a bonus, there's a second indicator bundled with this indicator, which is my power bar off the 20, which is a trade that I use constantly. That's also included with the opening power bar strategy. So I hope this discussion of stops and kind of where to set stops in this strategy was helpful. Again, comment power below if you want that cheat sheet. It's totally free. And if you found this video helpful, please hit like and subscribe. Ask me any questions about the strategy you want. I'll try to answer them in the comments. I get a lot of questions on the strategy, and I've tried to answer as many of those as I can. So if you ask, I'll try to get to yours as well. And thanks for taking the time to watch the video.